$25 billion. That's the current price tag that has been given by Pete Hegseth before a committee, the first committee that he's answered to since the Iran war started, which they're still calling the Iran conflict, the Iran engagement, the Iran shindig, the Iran shwarway, the Iran, I don't know, like the kumite, like whatever word, the Iran special military operation. The bill is $25 billion. Now, that is up to this point, according to Pete Hegseth and gang reporting to the United States. Now, they are asking for over another $200 billion on top of that to be able to both persecute the war and replenish the stockpiles that they have unleashed. Because right now, we are seeing that their straining of our stockpiles to carry out this war against Iran is now affecting other American security priorities, America's alliance structure, and a whole bunch of stuff outside of just, hey, we're throwing a bunch of bombs at Iran and, well, we haven't achieved any of our diplomatic objectives yet. That is still pending Trump's mission accomplished sign. He's already got the sign, but doesn't have the results yet. Now, Estonia, Lithuania, and Finland, they were supposed to get HIMARS. These are our long-range artillery rocket system, and they wanted to get them because of their good performance in Ukraine and the fact that, well, if the Russians on the war march again against Ukraine, the historical justifications that were used by Vladimir Putin to invade Ukraine could easily be used to invade many of the former Soviet states, and the Baltics, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, are front and center in that plan, as well as the Siloviki Gap being a particularly vulnerable location for a Russian offensive action if they wanted to try to prevent a NATO counter-response and try to cut off the Baltic states before NATO could do anything about it. Now, I'm not saying that that's a likely outcome, but I'm saying that these are the types of outcomes that nation states have to prevent against and prepare against, to deter against, to stop them from happening in the first place. The Estonians remember what it was like when the Russians came in 1940. After Poland was cut in half, the Baltics were given to the Soviets. Then the Baltics were occupied by the Nazis. Then the Baltics were reoccupied by the Soviets. And they have no interest in repeating history. The Estonian defense budget is already at 5%, and they're now diversifying their weapons input, not just from the United States, but from countries like South Korea, because they don't think the United States is a stable enough munitions provider. They're diversifying their portfolio, not only in Europe, but also to South Korea, which is one of the, to be frank, best weapons manufacturers in the world. Best as in, they make weapons that are effective. They make weapons that do their job, and they have a good ability to both copy systems and then make variations that can be attuned to whatever a country needs in their weapons arsenal. And that has allowed the South Korean industry, which is highly, highly advanced in its production facilities, to be leading in the world's armament market. Not to mention the fact that they also produce a certain amount of 155 millimeter artillery shells that could be useful for any country running on NATO standard munitions. Sorry, I'm actively dying. Point is, because the United States is not there to provide these munitions, and that we're now delaying orders, and you can listen to the Lithuanians and the Estonians, and they're like, well, is it going to be weeks? Is it going to be months? Is it going to be years? How long is it going to be until we get our HIMARS? And this is at the same time that they're trying to increase their budget. And so you've got these two things clashing against each other. The United States says, Europe, you need to spend more on defense. There's not a question about where they spend the money, like whether they should be spending it in the locations where they can get the most bang for their buck. There's not a question about whether or not, they need to coordinate more in the spending so that they, if you make bigger orders, you can get more for less. There's quantity is a quality of its own. This isn't the discussion. It was just raw number, raw financial input, 5%. Even if there's a possibility you don't need to spend that much and you could get your outcomes if you spend your money more wisely and don't just concentrate every defense budget within a nation's own domestic arms industry or within the districts that it is most beneficial to their jobs to have those weapons produced at. Now, obviously, this means Europe thinking about Europe's defense as a whole and not just the defense of an individual nation state, and seeing the wider picture, seeing the forest instead of just the trees. And that's why this type of nuance is not something that the Trump administration has really picked up on at all. And even though we hear about the need for an independence in European defense armaments, at the end of the day, every move we saw the Europeans made away from American defense armaments, talking about, well, maybe we should do this in Europe, maybe we should do this in Germany, maybe we should do this in X, Y, and Z. The response was, I mean, what do you mean? We want you to both spend more on defense and buy American. Spend more on defense and buy American. Be a boon for the American defense industry while the United States cuts off aid to Ukraine. It was not exactly the most favorable offer in the world, but given the circumstances and where European defense procurement is right now, many European states had to say, well, it is what it is. Hell, what are they going to do? Get their own F-35 at this point? Nah, it's going to be quite difficult. It's going to be quite difficult. But then the delays happened. Because we started other wars, that we got tied up in those wars, and now it doesn't look like we're getting out of those wars in the immediate future. You know, praying for a miracle, but being realistic. And so now the Trump administration is delaying these orders where these nation states were told before to be both increase your budget, buy American. Oh, wait, never mind. You bought American, but this was like this was like a pre-order. I mean, you'll get like the special like novelty backpack if you wait another 2 years. That's not going to fly. I say this with zero moral inclination on this. This is just a statement of fact. If the United States cannot deliver the munitions on time for security reasons that make sense, i.e., we need these immediately, and this is a bigger priority, then they're going to find other providers. And even if you do have good reasons, eventually they will still find other providers. It's just if you have a good reason, they would be more likely to wait a little bit. For example, if you told the Estonians, we would give these HIMARS to you, but we need to get them to the Ukrainians first. That's something that's within the defense interests. A HIMARS used against Russian positions in Ukraine is a Russian armored car that is not gonna, is a Russian armored column or Russian military equipment that's not gonna be used against Estonia. But these type of munitions already paid for, already ordered, being sent to the Middle East to be used against Iran in a war that nobody exactly knows if it's going anywhere. I mean, that's a lot less clear about both the strategic necessity, about a war of survival versus what was a war of choice, and like exactly when the end date's coming, when around is, when are they going to get their HIMARS? This is not as clearly aligned with their defense interests. And so it's not that the United States cannot ask for delays, but these delays were completely avoidable. These delays could have been not necessary at all. I mean, look, I'm not saying that it is guaranteed that by the end of this conflict that that the United States will not have achieved something when it comes to what Trump said his priorities were going into this. What I am saying is that the strain created is a fact now, and the results have yet to be proven. And so we're straining allies, not only in Ukraine and the Pearl program, but also Estonia, Lithuania, Finland, Taiwan, and a bunch of other nation states that are going to have trouble getting a replacement for those necessary munitions. That's not to say HIMARS are the end-all be-all for these countries' defense, but what will deter invasions is to have enough tools in your tool belt that no nation state would be silly enough to say, let's fight those drone swarms with a D-Day style landing. Let's go and invade X nation state, which is more than prepared to damage our supply routes behind the line with missiles that will make it so we can't move the munitions necessary into the country. That is what I would like to see addressed, is making sure that we can establish deterrence so we don't continue to spiral in these different regions. Because I want to avoid these wars that Pete Hegseth seems very excited to carry out. Now look, $25 billion, then $200 billion on top of that. Pete Hegseth is supposed to be the person out there advocating on behalf of the presidency, right? Because I do not think Donald Trump is doing a particularly good job right now.
So we had a good talk. I've known him a long time. I think he was ready to make a deal a while ago. I think some people made it difficult for him to make a deal, but we talked more about Ukraine.
But which war do you think ends first?
That's an interesting question. You know, coming from you, that's very interesting. Which war would end first? I don't know. Maybe they're on a similar timetable. I think Ukraine, militarily, they're defeated, okay? You wouldn't know that by reading the fake news, but militarily, look, their Navy. So they had 159 ships. Every ship is right now underwater. Typically, that's pretty good. What do you think, Jared? I mean, it's going to be hard for them to make a naval comeback. Okay, now they have an Air Force. Every one of their planes has been shot down or has been decimated. They have missiles, about 82% are gone, and they have drones, and most of them are gone. Most of the factories are mostly gone, and we have...
Now, he just keeps going, but he said Ukraine. He's not talking about Ukraine. Ukraine did not have a navy of 159 ships. Nothing he is saying, like, Ukraine still has an air force. Ukraine still does like long range aerial strikes. You know, they drop their own version of Cobbs. They glide strike kits and, you know, do air defense missions with their air force. So he's talking about Iran, but I mean, that's quite a blunder. That's quite a blunder. And that's just one of many blunders that make it so I do not think that this is the man to advocate on behalf of the war. And that's why we're going to watch Pete Hegseth in a moment talk before committee and explain exactly where the war is, what questions need to be answered, because a lot of questions need to be answered, and he gets grilled. But I want to talk about where the war is right now, considering the price tag, considering the logistics, the logistical impact on American allies. At this point, here is the strategy that the Trump administration is carrying out. And it is a strategy that could carry out this war for months more. The strategy is they've established this blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, so we're going to blockade their ships from leaving. And we said that one of the possibilities was they unleash bombardment, but then deal with the retaliation that could damage oil and gas infrastructure throughout the region, have retaliatory effects, or hold the blockade, trying to drain the Iranian economy under the understanding that that will also mean that gas prices are probably not going anywhere. There's a possibility that they get worse, and it's going to get closer and closer to the midterms if this drags out for months and the Iranians do not cave despite the economic and military pressure. Now, of course, they can resume hostilities, not extend the ceasefire, and have the blockade at the same time while not striking the oil and gas infrastructure, going back to striking military targets, going back to striking different government targets, but allowing the energy infrastructure and oil and gas infrastructure to stay in place to try to add another pressure lever. But even in that outcome, the Iranians could still tell them to shove it. That's not to say that there aren't Iranians that do not think that, you know, the economic pressure is too much to bear, or the military pressure is too much to bear. But there are a lot of hardliners that feel vindicated right now that Iran needed an atomic weapon the entire time. And when Donald Trump is putting that hard line in the sand, like, you need to give up your atomic weapon, after he just blew up the Ayatollah, some of them feel like, okay, we give up the atomic weapon, they come back and bomb us again in a year. And then when they're bombing us again in a year, we won't have an atomic weapons program to try to even advance to begin with. We will have given up all of our progress. If we want to pursue it again, we'd have to give up, start from scratch, and we wouldn't have any leverage to get the sanctions removed. Point is, there's hardliners that believe that this entire war is a justification of their policy of having an atomic weapons program to begin with. And that it is a confirmation of their worst fears about the United States, that the United States was going to bomb them, was going to try to change their government, was going to do everything they could to bring about the downfall of the Islamic Revolution. And absolutely, that's what the Trump administration wanted, but that's not the way the cookie crumbled. And now he's trying to find some some other outcome, some intermediate goal, so he can walk away with this from this war saying that it was a victory despite the heavy amount of munitions used. And he doesn't want to cross the red line of attacking the oil and gas infrastructure due to the retaliation. He doesn't want to put troops on the ground because that would be politically disastrous. And so he has accepted a different possibility, which is not as politically disastrous, but is still slightly less politically disastrous. And that outcome is waiting it out. The United States has more access to international capital than the Iranians. The United States produces more oil and gas than the Iranians. The United States is the biggest producer in the world. The United States has a very large economy. The United States, if it truly wants to, can wait this out. Donald Trump's party's political fortunes might not be able to, but the United States will survive until 2027, even if we blockade the Strait of Hormuz throughout the entirety of this year, though I doubt it would get that far. And I hope it does not get that far. But that would assume that the Trump administration completely is saying, you know, we're willing to drag this up all the way up to the midterms, all the way up like, so I mean, July, August is like the time frame I'm hearing now for the months and months that they're willing to keep this going. But does that mean they would end it right before the midterms? And I mean, even if they did, would the requisite downward trickle effect on the economy be registered? I mean, no. I mean, there might be some immediate pressures being lifted to some extent, but the downward trickle effect on the rest of the economy of the negative inflationary effects and cost of living effects will have already registered through the American economy at that point. You cannot reverse it. So there's a question that the president needs to ask. The question is, can the Iranians last a few more months? And if they can, would he be willing to carry out this blockade throughout the midterms, up until or throughout the midterms, if necessary, if it required that in order to make the Iranian government collapse? Because it might, or cave. But if he was to do that, that would be a question of, would Trump trade the loss of the midterms for a stronger hand against the Iranians? And a lot of negotiations isn't just whether or not Trump knows he would do that, and this is going to be the difficult part for Trump, is whether the Iranians believe he will do that. Because Trump can say, yes, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to wait them out for months. That is what he is saying now. That is what Trump administration officials are telling people in the business community. They're saying, like, we will wait this out for months if necessary. From this point, mind you. Remember when he said we were ahead of schedule? Anyway, if that's the strategy that he conducts and he waits them out for months, or believes he will wait them out for months, that doesn't mean the Iranians believe him. I mean, Teflon Don is not exactly remembered for a lack of flip-flopping. He's also not remembered for a lack of getting all the way up to the precipice and then backing down. Of course, the war in and of itself shows that he's more than willing to go over that precipice when he wants to, but his record and the Iranians, I don't want to call it like naive hopefulness, but a definitely like hopefulness when it comes to their outcomes, could lead to them just saying, you know what, we'll wait them out. The political pressures will become too much. The American electoral system will pressure the American president, and as the midterms come closer, he will inevitably force a deal that will be better for us than if we were to negotiate a deal right now that required us giving up our atomic weapons program and our atomic material in its entirety. Which seems to be like the main focus of what the Trump administration is pushing at this point. Which makes sense. If there is anything that they should be focusing on, that one is the most popular. And actually is a long-term security objective of the United States. Is less atomic weapons in the hands of countries everywhere. Anyway, long story short, $25 billion price tag. They want. Oh.
This would have never have happened if Iran had a ballroom.
Thank you for the $5, Renegade Chungus. $25 billion, won over $200 billion more, and this could go for months longer, which could have a downward effect on the economy downward effect on keeping oil prices over $100 a barrel, fueling the Russian war effort, continuing that war as well. Good job, Mr. Peacemaker. As well as a negative effect on Trump's election chances in the midterms. But if he also cuts tail and run, you know, he stuffs his tail between his legs, turns around and just leaves. If he does that, that will also have a negative effect on the midterms, because then people will ask, why did we die? You know, why did American soldiers die? Why did we spend all this money on the war? Why did we have all these negative effects on the economy? And so Trump has to find a way to get an outcome here. Some outcome, a outcome. Most beneficial would be one on atomic weapons. But he needs to find a way to get an outcome if he wants to get out of this in a way that is somewhat defensible. Stuffing his tail between his legs and running is a sure disaster. Going forward and just through the midterms, allowing the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz to continue and the requisite negative effects on the economy would be a real negative outcome for his election chances. But I mean, that doesn't give him a lot of wiggle room unless he completely disregards how he wants Republicans to do in the midterms, which I am not convinced he cares that little, especially if he knows he'll get the blame, which he will. Absolutely.